because oftentimes we'll get papers and they stay pretty open-ended. There may be like a scientific or scholarly conclusion, but really what we want to do is make sure that the papers and the presentations tie back to our track supervisors, our roadmasters, and a lot of the people who come in. Why is this important to me? All this great research, but why is it important? How can I use that in my day job? And that's been one of the things I've worked on every time I've been involved in the board of directors. Let's make sure there's a good conclusion to the whole thing that's useful for all the participants.
You may know the American Railway Engineering and Maintenance of Way Association, or AREMA, as the, quote, keepers of the manuals. You may know them as the, quote, people behind the largest annual railroad conference in North America. Heck, you may not know about AREMA at all. This podcast is designed, no pun intended, to change your view of who AREMA is and how AREMA has changed the trajectory of many railway careers over its 100-plus year history. Welcome to Platform Chats with your host, Walt Blesser, where he takes a moment to discuss the impacts AREMA has had on the very people who are proud to be called members. Are you ready to roll with AREMA?
ARE Corporation is a proud supporter of AREMA and Platform Chats. If you are looking to take your railway structures career to the next level, or simply start it down the right track, please visit us at arecorp.com. Please see our brand new job postings on our careers page or on our LinkedIn page.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to yet another episode of Platform Chats. We are still doing it here, folks. 3 years in, you never thought we'd have this much material to talk about in the railway industry, but it just keeps coming, and there's probably never been a better time to be a member of this great organization. There's just a ton going on, and we're going to talk about some upcoming items, if you will, or opportunities to get involved in a couple of the functional groups. So we've had some comments around what the different functional groups do. Also, what the directors do. The way we are organized in AREMA is we have a certain number of committees that report up to what is called a functional group vice president. And that vice president has two directors typically that assist him or her mostly in the review of papers. So let's say you've got a great paper to put together for the track functional group and you submit it and you wonder where in the ether does it go. It is typically reviewed by a couple of directors as well as the vice president of that functional group. And they're the ones that select which papers get presented at the annual conference, which is a pretty big deal. I know we oftentimes we can go from 50 to 70 submittals down to say 10 to 15 that actually make it. These folks are typically people that have been involved in AREMA for a very long time. Many of them have worked their way up from secretary, vice chair, chairman, which can be a 9+ year commitment to the organization of one of the committees within the functional group. And even there, you don't really get guaranteed a spot as a director. As a director, you have to be typically nominated by your peers, and your peers have to agree, yeah, that person is good for this community. That person is good for what we're trying to do at AREMA. And from there, there's no guarantee you get to be vice president either of the functional group. And then if you're really interested, from there, that is where we select our next senior vice president, who then becomes a president of AREMA. So there is quite a bit of, I don't want to say smoke and mirrors, but there's definitely as you get higher and higher, if you will, in the organization, it really does become a lot of your peers agreeing that you've done a lot of good things. And it's really a recognition of everything you've done as a volunteer, since this is a volunteer organization. So what we're going to try to do here is kick off a mini series, if you will, of the new directors that are coming in. We're going to try to hit almost all the functional groups over a couple podcasts here, so they can kind of give you a background on how they got to where they are, what their functional group covers, and even upcoming committee meetings just to get people involved. And hey, if they've got something that's on their chest, as it relates to the papers, something that they want to see, something that they don't want to see. I can tell you as a director, there were several things I was tired of seeing in submittals that got rejected. So without further ado, we have engineering services represented today as well as track. So we've got two functional groups, respectively. And we're going to kick it off with Michael, who's representing the engineering services group. Why don't you go ahead and just give us a background, Mike, on who you are, everything about you for our listeners, and we'll go from there. And David, you'll have to wait for him to finish up.
Thanks, Walt. So Mike Atzert, currently work at Burns and McDonnell. Recently made a career, I say career, but changed consultant. So I have a wife, 3 kids, live south of St. Louis, about an hour. Interesting fact of mine is we purchased property and built our dream home on 23 acres, and I have a small hobby farm. So in addition to railroading, I could say I'm a small farmer. But when I have a little bit of extra time outside of work, kids are very active, keep going. But I started my railroad career actually in college. I used to work at Design 9, where I was started a co-op / intern position. My brother actually went to a wedding of one of his friends, which happened to be the owner. It was his son of Design 9, one of the 5 owners. And my brother, probably a little intoxicated, was talking about how I was going to engineering school and was looking for a part-time job doing civil engineering just right across the street in Illinois. And I started to do a co-op position my sophomore year in college. And I continued to work through them all through college. So I basically did a co-op / intern position, working full-time in the summer, part-time during the school year, all rail-related projects, surveying, construction staking, helping the design engineers on drawings, drafting, anything I could. And as we know, the railroad, it does not sleep. So I was working evenings, weekends, especially from the construction aspect. And once I graduated, I knew I was hooked. So I wanted to stay in the railroad career, where I kept going. So I ended up, shortly after graduating, I joined AREMA in 2004. And at that time, I was doing a lot of yards and terminals work, back when they still had hump yards, before precision scheduled railroading. We were doing some hump yard modifications, and I was like, oh, yards and terminals. That sounds like it's a good fit for me. I do a lot of industrial work, a lot of yard works, bulk facilities, bulk transfer. So I joined Committee 14, Yards and Terminals, and wasn't shortly after that the secretary position came up. And being the young guy, I was like, oh, I can do that. I can see what that's about. And that started my 9-year career in AREMA leadership at the committee level. And that was great for me as a young person coming on board. Met a lot of people, a lot of old heads, as we like to call them, but I learned a ton from them. And I was just hooked between AREMA and the whole railroad engineering behind the principles and seeing the construction on site. I got to see a lot of construction, a lot of project management, and I just knew that was the career for me. So I took off with that, and I spent over 20 years with Design 9, traveling across the nation, doing various industrial and some Class 1 and a lot of short line railroad work. Got to be assigned to a couple of railroad bridge projects, which were even more fascinating. And the whole everything about railroading, it just tickled me. It motivated me. It kept me energized. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep with this career path. I was lucky enough to be nominated to be a director with engineering services, and that role is very flattered by that. But that's basically my backstory.
That's fantastic. And we're going to go ahead and hold on getting a little bit more into engineering services functional group while we get David's background. David, thank you for being patient. Why don't you wow the crowd with your career?
All right. Yeah. So, yeah, my railroad career started right out of college. I went to the esteemed university of the University of Kentucky, graduated there in both 1995 and 1996. While I was working on my master's, that's when I entered a civil engineering railroad paper contest that was sponsored by the AREA. And I happened to win a stipend. I think it was about $500 to help me pay for some bills, and it came with a free year of being in the AREA. So I kept up my membership. I can't remember if I lost a year or two in there, um, but anyway, started working for CSX in 1996. I was not in engineering. I started out as a train master, working around the Cincinnati area, chasing around after boxcars and train crews and locomotives and things of that nature. In 1997, I got saved out of transportation and went and worked on a W. Hay Winter Award up in northern Ohio and northern Indiana, double tracking the old B&O tracks up there so we could merge successfully with the Conrail system. About 2000, I moved down to Jacksonville and worked down there in our design and construction department. Due to some management changes, ended up over in system production, and then finally in the standards department, which is where I really took off with my AREMA career. So that's when I joined both Committee 4 Rail and Committee 5 Track. Committee 5, the track is where I went through the leadership roles. I served, on the subcommittee for a while, got to be the chairman of the subcommittee, moved up to the full committee secretary, vice chair, and chairman through that time frame. Also, when I was about the time I was secretary of the full committee, I did get voted onto the board of directors there quite a while back, and then after I finished up my chairmanship, was also voted back on the board of directors, and then back here as vice president of the Track Functional Group. But in my career, I'm currently covering construction activities in our northern region, so from St. Louis to way up in Maine now that CSX has purchased the Pan Am. So got a lot of work activity going on up in that country. So spent a lot of time out traveling around. With AREMA, though, continued to work here on the things like you were talking about earlier, Walt, with the papers and getting ready for the annual conference. Spent a couple of times working with the publications committee there at headquarters. That's when we would come in and review all the ballots before they went to publication, kind of be the transfer from the committees to the actual publishing side of it, making sure that everything looked right and sounded right, and everybody remembered what they were voting on, so it got into the portfolio or into the manual correctly.
Excellent. Thank you for that, both of you, for your introductions. So I heard C4 rail and C5 track, and then C14. Michael, that's you, right? That was
correct.
Okay,
yeah, yards and terminals.
Can you give us a rundown, Michael, on who all makes up engineering services, which committees?
Yes. I just have to, first of all, I gotta say, David's got a lot colorful history than I do. I just got 20 years consultant, no year change or anything. I gotta beef that up a little bit, I guess.
You got time. You got plenty of time.
Man,
you're a young guy.
Now they say, I'm an oddball. The no position or career changes is an odd entity. So I don't know all the full names, but right now, engineering services is made up of Committee 6, 13, 14, 16, 18, and 24, which I'm going to go from my recollection here, and I apologize. 24 is education and training. So they're the main entity that put on most of the webinars, all the design seminars, and they pretty much push that and try to kind of oversight of that process. They were big and instrumental in setting up the webinars, which I think has been a huge success, and try to promote that and also do a little quality control on that. Committee 6, passenger facilities. Committee 13 is environmental, which is going to be a huge effort here. As we all know, the industry, not just our rail industry, but really everywhere is trying to promote sustainability. So that's something new they're looking on. Committee 16 is economics, and Committee 18 is basically represents the short line industries. So that used to come from AREA. So.
And then 14 is yards and terminals. That's
my 14. Yep, yards and terminals.
Perfect. Okay, excellent. And any upcoming committee meetings that may, or did you just get through all of yours? I know in structures, almost every single structures group met in January or February, so we're kind of on hold until the summer. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, so Committee 14, we have our spring session in Texas, Houston, Texas. It's going to be in late April. We usually hold our spring meeting in April. And I do know Committee 13, Environmental, has a meeting May 2nd to 4th in Florida. Okay. The other ones I did not have enough information on, but I know the one in Texas for Committee 14 is going to be a great one because we're going to check out the new Waco, what I would consider mega facility, mega terminal. So it should be a perfect fit for our yards and terminals group.
Oh, cool. So there's an opportunity for a pretty cool field trip is what it sounds
if you're going to go to a field trip, this would be, I'm super excited about it. So.
All right, folks, if that tickles your fancy, reach out to Michael or go onto the AREMA website and find I'm not sure who the chair is of 14 at this point. It's not you, right?
No, it's Kirsten Bowman.
Okay, cool.
But yep. So, and we appreciate Waco. They're finding these people to sponsor these field trips and allow us into their facilities with all the sensitivity of matters and cost, and it's just a huge help to AREMA and our committees. Trying to find these field trip opportunities. It's one of the super benefits, I guess, of being on an AREMA committee. So
yeah, you get to access some pretty cool stuff. I know Committee 7 recently met in Russellville, Arkansas, and they got to tour the Stella Jones tie treatment plant, which I thought was pretty cool. Now, before I go to David here, the only other question I had for you is I know 24 doesn't really maintain any sort of chapter material. I know they're doing mostly teaching and webinars, and they're very outwardly facing. Do the other committees have chapters that they maintain?
Yes, so all the other committees have chapters except for 24. So 24 just really pushes that educational and kind of pushes us more technical committees to do better in providing material to educate people. So
fantastic. Okay. Yeah, and great story too. I mean, I think people need to understand that, hey, just join a committee. You never know when you're going to need help. I had a very similar story to you, where I think it was my second or third year of going to Committee 7, and they needed a secretary. And I just raised my hand. Next thing you know, I mean, you just get thrown into the middle of everything and learn a lot taking all those notes at all those meetings. It's a pretty steep learning curve, but it pays off, and no one really cares if you got 1 year of experience or 25. If you're willing to jump in there and just help out, people appreciate it. All right, well, let's go to one of the granddaddy functional groups here, TRAC. David, let's get an overview of that group if you don't mind.
Yeah, we've got 4 committees that are in our functional group. It's kind of like you said, the granddaddy. It's the basis of the railroad. We'll start with Committee 1. That's roadbed and ballast. I mean, that's everything from pipes and how the roadbed's built. I think there's some utilities hiding in there and some other things, but that's basically everything from the ballast down. They just had their committee meeting. I didn't find out when their next one is, but they just had one as part of the ballast symposium. Then we move up in the track structure to Committee 4. That's rail. That's everything rail. That's rail grinding. That's the design of rail. That's the rail shape. That's all the things that they do. Joint bars. I mean, just everything dealing with the rail. Their next meeting is looks like March 7th in Virginia Beach. They're going to go on a tour through the Plaza American plant, looks like. And I bet they'll have a good time with that. Committee 5 is track. So this is how all those components come back together. So we've got special track work, So that would be diamonds. We've got a road crossing section. We've got a construction section, track geometry, and believe it or not, tools. So if you've got a claw bar that's not working, look in Committee 5, Subcommittee number 2, and you'll find some stuff on claw bars. Our next meeting on Committee 5 is in Dallas, and that is in mid-May, the 15th to the 17th. And then, not to be outdone by all those other committees, we have Committee 30, and that's cross ties. So it's not limited, though, just to wood. There's discussions in there about steel and concrete and alternative material cross ties. But that's where you get down talking about, the type of wood, the treatments, and all the different things that go with cross ties and some of the fastening systems. So that's their group, and their next meeting looks like it's going to be a virtual meeting or series of meetings, April 25th through 27th. So a lot of meetings coming up, or we just happened. Usually these committees meet twice a year in the spring and then in the fall sometime around the annual conference.
And Michael, are you guys the same? Is it twice a year for most years?
Yeah, for us it's twice a year. I know for Committee 14 we actually do one spring meeting, and then our fall meetings always in conjunction with the annual conference.
Okay.
That's not the case with all committees. On average, I think a lot of committees do that same kind of two in-person meetings a year. Some people do that either in conjunction with the annual conference, and some do not. So, and that changes per, as people come in and out, they decide to change that. So,
okay. Well, and I know 30, I think, has a little bit of overlap with Committee 7. So we tend to deal more with the structural ties. As soon as you get open deck bridge ties involved, I know we talk to 30. And 30's got some interesting stuff going on too, David. I know at least the last time I went down to Pueblo, there was quite a bit of scuttlebutt around just new material types for ties, like glulam, concrete, styrofoam. Like I remember there was a high pressure styrofoam from Japan. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in all the committees on the track side. Is there anything else you can think of?
Well, the only other thing is the portfolio of track work plans. That comes out of Committee 5. I forgot about that book. That's often overlooked. And dadgummit, I was the chairman of that subcommittee on Committee 5 there for a long time. But a lot of effort goes into those portfolios, and we try to publish those every couple of years. Get 10 or 15 drawings that are updated and get that book modernized. So that's another big piece of our functional group I forgot to mention there a second ago.
And are all the track ones full? Are they? Do you have waiting lists for membership on any of those committees, or are they still pretty open?
They're pretty full, but if you've got an interest and a resume and willing to be an active participant, they'll always make room for you. All these are about 150 strong. Meetings will be 60 to 100 people, depending on where they're at and what kind of tours and things that are involved. You get a train trip somewhere like in Canada or something. A lot of people find their way on these tours, but if we've got somebody who really wants to participate or experts in the industry, they'll always find room to get you on the committee.
Okay, that's fantastic news. Same with you, Mike.
Yeah. So our committee averages, I think we have a roster of about 90 for Committee 14, about 40 to 60, I would say, participate at the meetings. And I would say that's fairly common. Now, the environmental group, they're a little bit smaller, but they're rebuilding, new initiative, bringing people forward. I do want to correct Walt that Committee 6 is it's passenger facilities, but they kind of reclassified it as rail facilities, utilities, and buildings. So it was before passengers. But so Committee 13 and 16 are probably a little bit one of our smaller committees. And I think they're just, looking for people in that, always looking for membership, always looking for input. The good thing about, the environmental aspect is, it kind of has to do with the sustainability these days. So it's definitely looking for members on that input. It's not just permits. It's kind of beyond permits. So there's a lot more. It doesn't hurt to go to the annual conference and step into these meetings, or just, get a sample of what they have. Just reach out to the chairman and see what they offer and what they do and what's on their current active list. And maybe you'll be interested in participating. I know one thing interesting too about Committee 16 is the economics of railway engineering operations is some of that influences what they have in their chapter actually influences our design as far as, what's economical to do as far as, depth of track ballast, depth of sub ballast, type of rail. I mean, all that has to do, and, there's a rate of return. And I hear that more often on the industrial side. Clients want to know what's the rate of return on their investment. Do I go with 136 pound or 115 pound rail? What's the cost of maintenance? What's the cost of, delays from maintenance? So that group actually does a lot more, I think, than what most people give it credit for, based on, how they influence design or can influence design or justify the design. As you were talking about the different type of timber ties, that would go in part of their analysis, of, do we put grade timber ties in or do we put IGs or, what size rail? And so
Yeah, that's
everybody's
interesting.
definitely looking for growth.
I did not know that, and I'm really glad you brought that up. I know 13 has had a little bit of a limelight. To your point, the Sustainability Resiliency Symposium that's potentially coming up next year. We had a podcast on that. That was our last episode, actually. I believe there's a position paper now out, and look for some more podcasts later this summer, if not fall, as we get closer and closer to having that symposium. And you've got it. Both of you made a good point about the annual conference, being able to come in there and dip into different committee meetings as you see fit. That's a good way to kind of get your feet wet, if you will. So let's take one step over. Let's to David here. It sounds like you're a VP. Is that right?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
And what does that role entail? Did I cover that relatively well at the beginning?
Yeah, I think you covered it. We help decide what papers are going to be in. We're reading the abstracts. So this season we're studying the abstracts. I think by this point we have made our list of who we think we want in or to give presentations at the conference. So those authors are out writing their papers now or getting them prepared, and then later in the year we'll start reviewing those. We'll start reviewing presentations, making sure they meet the guidelines, and that if we get a paper in that there's really the hook to it. What's it for? Why? Because oftentimes we'll get papers and they stay pretty open ended. There may be like a scientific or scholarly conclusion, but really what we want to do is make sure that the papers and the presentations tie back to our track supervisors, our roadmasters, and a lot of the people who come in. Why is this important to me? All this great research, but why is it important? How can I use that in my day job? And that's been one of the things I've worked on every time I've been involved in the board of directors. Let's make sure there's a good conclusion to the whole thing that's useful for all the participants.
I don't think I could have said that better. Thank you so much for saying that. I was a director on the structures group for 3 years, and similarly, not only do we get some pretty interesting paper. I mean, just statistically, David, how many papers or abstracts, let's say, did you guys get roughly?
I think we got about 20 or so
Okay.
this cycle, and I think we get a similar number every year. Based on what I've seen. So, we've got to fit it into the schedule. What's interesting, we look to see that, sometimes we get people from Europe or Asia, make sure that they're able to travel and things of that nature. I know, closer to COVID times, we had to be careful who we selected, with some of that. We also look and see if do we know the people? Have we heard them before? Are they going to be good presenters and really make the show worthwhile to come to. So
Yep, absolutely. And Michael, similar? I mean, are you guys still in the process of going through abstracts, or?
No, we already went through the abstracts. We usually get on, they were telling me this is my first year, and it was, so the program committee be about 30 plus abstracts we get. And we truly try to do a matrix of what David was saying, but we kind of also break it into categories of what's, academia, and try to hit, always want something new and emerging technology or something, that hasn't been addressed before. Looking at don't want too many of the more duplicate speakers or duplicate topics. So, how somebody writes their abstract is basically, the selling point on what makes you different than everybody else. Because we're reading basically a couple hundred words to figure out how you're going to present it. And if it, our ending goal is the audience, is this have an interest to the audience, right? Are they going to stay? Are they say, what, I'm going to wake up early, or I'm going to skip this to go to this presentation, So you want to have it, and you want to hit all different levels of mindset with people with different backgrounds. So we go through a ranking systems just on the best guess of what we think the target audience would want to hear and see. And as we said, what do our members get the most benefit out of, from a large spectrum of abstracts.
And that's a great point you bring up, is there is competition, right?
Yeah.
So on Tuesday, all the different functional groups have basically their own room, right? They each have an individual room, and some of the topics could get someone excited from track who might come running over to you, and vice versa, right? Or structures or whatever it may be. So that's a great point. You're trying to broaden the interest level to draw quote unquote spectators to the presentations. Interesting. All right, cool. And so then, David, how long is your tenure going to be here as the VP?
So as the VP, I just started in this cycle, so I've got, you can look for me for about another 2.5 years before I've put in my 3-year term.
Cool. And is there anything did you run on any sort of platform? Is there anything you wish you would like to see different by the time you're done?
The biggest thing that I guess, in addition to what we talked about with the papers, just to make sure that we've got good support for the committees, and we do right now. I know a couple of years back we made a lot of changes to the electronic formatting and forms, and that was a big help. The only other thing is, as I was reviewing some ballots even today, I was a little confused by what the committee was trying to do, and I didn't get to that committee meeting. So just making sure we have ballot clarity for all of our committees going forward, and that, if there was a platform, that would be it. Just because as you move on to the next thing, well, you kind of forgot what you were maybe trying to do when it was the heat of the battle. So we want to make sure that transfers from the volunteers through the voting and on up at headquarters and gets in the manual properly. So just good documentation in the beginning.
Michael, anything for you guys? I know this is you're brand new as well.
Yep, I'm brand new, so I'll be on 3 years, and I'm kind of sticking with I know me personally in my role here as a director. Back when I came on as secretary, and you start to ask questions and wonder why, and going through the bylaws and the regulations, which are all there. It's kind of the big push that REMA is doing now, is following that echo, is that we're here to keep all the information in the MRE current, right? Within 7 years, it should be marked, as either still valid or invalid. In addition to that, there's also a style guide, a manual for railway engineering style guide. Make sure the formatting is used correctly. Shall, could, would, certain words we want to use, certain words we don't want to use, because we are providing a technical, somewhat legal paper that's used if anybody's been in any kind of those lawsuits or any kind of questionable contractual issue. The REMA is used, so there is proper language to use, and there's proper language to avoid and delete. So as I see ballots coming in from a director's role, and I see ballots coming in general. I think I'm going to push more and even recommend it to AREMA about starting some, maybe not a mini podcast like Walt here, but definitely some mini webinars that we can even be pre-recorded to kind of go over that style guide, because it would definitely make our lives as directors and VPs and reviewing ballots for final approval by the board a lot easier. And there's a lot in there, and there's still a lot of everybody's volunteering and looking to create these ballots themselves, or the material to get approved for the ballots. But we kind of need to bring it back in and understand the fundamentals of the ballots. Kind of like David was saying, is why are you doing this revision, and how can we say it contractually and professionally and make it all look the same throughout all of the chapters? Because as a consultant, when I have sub-consultants and I force them to buy the AREMA MRE, because I'm not allowed to share it, and if they're going to be performing rail engineering work for me, they need to have a copy to have that reference material. I want to make sure that they're getting that value and user-friendly and formatting all looks. So that's going to be something that I'm going to push for, and hopefully coming out this year is some mini webinar sessions.
That is interesting. I had no idea you were thinking about doing that, because I wish I had that about 7 years ago as vice chair when we were doing most of the ballot work for 7, right? So just being consistent across the board with all these committees. And you're right, everything that goes through letter ballot makes its way, well, not everything, but assuming it makes its way through the committee up the ranks. That's how the MRE gets updated. And it is a consensus standard, and it is used as a consensus standard in the industry. Anything you want to add to that, David?
No, I think we've covered it. I mean, full gamut. So good job.
So one thing I said, David, I think most people don't know, and maybe if I'm incorrect. So like me is my position. I am a consultant. I am not a railroad employee. So, and Walt, is that correct? Is that, I feel like I always tell people this and they're surprised, but so my role in AREMA will end after my next position could be a vice president of engineering services. And then following that, as a consultant, a non-railroad employee, that's where my leadership would end unless I would get nominated for the nominating committee.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. And I can tell you in the last meeting I attended, there could be some changes to that on the horizon. We are seeing, I'm in a similar boat as you, right? So we are seeing for the first time ever, the membership of AREMA globally has changed. It's shifted from, for the first time ever, there are more consultants and suppliers than there are railroad employees. That is new to AREMA, and they are having to step back and look at how does that affect our organization, because we still want to be able to reward the voluntary efforts regardless of who provides you a paycheck. And so that is a hot topic right now, I know, with the board of directors and the board of governors, is to say, okay, how is that going to affect how we look? We need to look, our leadership should be representative of our volunteers. And so you and I are in similar boats. It sounds like we both have been with this organization roughly about the same time. And I brought that up many times. And the times they are changing. And it's not because, just so we're clear, it's not because the class ones and the short line people are quitting AREMA or leaving the industry. They're following what's going on at the big corporations. If the class ones decide to change their look or makeup of their employee base, that knowledge base sometimes just goes over to the other side, to a consultant base, and they're still in the industry, right? So we don't want them punished for any of that. So that's probably the most delicate way I can talk about that subject on this podcast. But it is, we are changing. So
we have that same issue on the committee levels, right? So we're supposed to have only so many consultants, so many suppliers, so many contractors, and we talk about it on a regular basis is, well, if somebody's willing to volunteer and they put the good effort, and that, how can you say no to a volunteer on somebody who's willing to, take AREMA to the next level? So I know some committees have their individual bylaws, but it is something that we talk about regularly. And
well, I actually think that's a good way to end it, because that's exactly what we're looking for. Is I don't care who you work for. If you're in the industry and you want to make a difference and you want to put that hand up, like you just mentioned, I think, and you want to make it better than it was before, come on board, because that's what we need. And well, David, honestly, I'll give you the last, since you've been the most patient here, I'll give you the last word, and we're going to wrap this one up.
All right. No, you're right. The volunteers is what make AREMA great. I mean, it's awesome to go to a committee meeting or to the annual conference and know that you're in with amongst the world's leaders of railroad and problem solving and those kinds of things. So I've been proud to be able to join those ranks, with all those people. So thanks for the opportunity, Walt.
Absolutely. Very much appreciated to have both of you on. This is a great one. I learned something, and I think I'm going to try to do the next podcast, maybe with a couple more functional group leaders. You guys are pioneers for me. Appreciate you joining me today, and I appreciate all the information that you provided our listeners. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Walt.
Yeah, thanks, Walt.
Thank you for rolling with AREMA on today's episode of Platform Chats. For further information about AREMA, please visit arema.org or contact us at info@arema.org.